You're listening to WRUULP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul.
Check, check, 1, 2. Look like a little country, some rock and roll and blues. 'Cause we sure love playing for good people like you. Let me know if you can hear me. Check, check, 1, 2.
Welcome to Music Local and Sustainable, the radio show that features discussions with and the music of local musicians. I am your host, Dave Lake. Tonight we have Abbey Terry, local classical singer and voice, piano, and drama teacher in the studio. Welcome, Abbey Terry.
Hi.
Tell us a little bit about your musical journey to this point.
Well, it's really interesting. I had really good training as a child. My parents were not musicians themselves, but they were interested in music. So they made sure that I was able to take lessons, piano lessons and voice lessons, and then I had participation in the community arts like theater and in my school and in the church music world. I was raised Catholic, and so I had a lot of opportunities to sort of use those skills as a kid. And then when I reached college, I entered music school for a year, and then my life took a different direction, and I went into a different field. I worked in library studies, and I worked in academia, and I actually didn't do much with music at all for about a decade and a half. I focused on my writing, and I got married, and when I came to Savannah, I had just gotten a master's degree in art. My husband, Dr. Abbey Terry, is a professor of English at Armstrong. And we thought that I would teach art wherever he moved. And we came to Savannah, and because of the Savannah College of Art and Design, there's not much need for art teachers in this city. So I needed to do something. Strangely enough, I went back into classical music to make money, which is not the story that you usually would hear. I needed to go back to school, so I entered the music program at Armstrong. I had been working in dementia care, and I had been seeing in my work with the elderly how useful the music was to them, how that would really bring people out of their shell. People who only had maybe 2 minutes of working memory suddenly could remember songs and sing. It was really encouraging to them, to their families. So I thought, maybe I'll combine music with a gerontology degree. I was really fortunate to get a scholarship from Skidaway Island United Methodist to study the Joyce Ludish Memorial Scholarship. With that support and that encouragement from their church family there, I was able to really focus on my training. And within about a year, I was teaching voice here in the area and just studying and singing. And I'm still an undergraduate music major at this point. I'm officially a junior. But I am working in the field. I work for St. John's Episcopal Church now, and I sing in the area, and I sing for lots of local organizations. I worked with Tori for a while. I'm just trying to build my career. But my main focus is really teaching. I've just found that I love it. I love working with people of all ages. I love working with beginners. And I think it's just a great way to empower and encourage people. So often, I think people think of music as something that you have to do, like you have to be great at it or else you can't do it, right? They come to me and they say, oh, I'm no good at singing. Music is a learned skill, just like any other thing we do, like math or baseball or reading. And often the people I see who have a deficit in it are people who didn't do a lot of it as children. So they didn't really build that ear or those skills or that muscle memory. And they've been shamed. It's really sad for me to see that. So when I can work with somebody and build their confidence and sort of give them those skills, that's the best thing I can do. My teaching is really my main focus at this point, and performance I see as a vehicle to just improve my skills and be able to share and connect with others. I think people think, oh, she's a opera singer, a classical singer, they always want to be out front, they want the attention, she's a diva, right? I like attention just as much as the next person, probably more than the next person. But what I like best is collaboration. And that's what anybody who is a musician, they know that. That's what they do. You're always working with others. You're working with the audience, too. You're always collaborating with the audience. It's never just you. So that's my journey.
It's very unusual.
It is very unusual that someone would come back after like 15 or 20 years away. I hadn't played piano between the time I was 15 and the time I was 39. They always say practice, practice, practice. And you don't really understand what that's for. You think, I'm supposed to practice because I'm supposed to be a good person, or I'm supposed to practice because of show diligence, right? But really, you're just building muscle memory. You're giving yourself the chance to improve. And that's the only way the body can learn, through repetition. It's not a state of being good or bad or morally, courageous or weak. It's just allowing yourself the time to gain those muscle skills. And whether we do that in music, or we do that in baseball, or we do it in typing, or in becoming a surgeon, we choose to allocate our time. What I found is when I started trying to do music again, and I actually did practice, several hours a day, every day, how very rapidly I improved. And I think anybody would, if you truly concentrate and allocate that much time to something, you will improve. It really made me believe in that kind of power of learning. I was very fortunate to have really good training as a kid, and so it stayed with me. And I'm really grateful to my teachers in that regard. I didn't realize it then, but I know now.
How do you share that knowledge that you have about the fact that if you do practice and it does become muscle memory, you'll see that improvement and it will stick with you? Mm-hmm. How do you share that with your students?
I really try to be explicit in my teaching. I think a lot of times, especially adults, when they're talking to children, forget how much they have already learned and how much the kid really does not know about the world. We forget what it's like to be new. We know that when we practice something, we get better at it, but they may not. Children are used to learning things quickly, and they don't remember the most important times of their learning. They don't remember learning to walk. They don't remember learning to speak, sometimes even to read. It happens sometimes. So we have to remind them of that. And so I try to break down for them that this is how the brain works. Like it's a function of our biology. Depending on their age level, of course, I'm going to explain it in different ways. But I try to talk about it as a function of our neurology and our mind-body learning, as opposed to some kind of innate talent that we have. And a lot of times people are coming to me and what they really want to know is, am I good enough? And I will never answer that question, because I never want to tell anybody it's an on or off situation. It's never a question of whether you have talent or not. We all have the capacity to improve. You're never just good or bad at something. I'm always trying to stress, you can do it if you want to allocate the time. Some people are going to naturally have a little easier time. I try to make it something that a shared state that we have as humans with our body. And I think that's counter to a lot of the arguments that you hear people making about, well, he's a good singer, or he's a natural ear, or she just has a God-given voice. But it's really a function of how we choose to put our energy into it. As for how I bring that across to my students, sometimes I will play for them and I will deliberately make mistakes so that they can see that I'm learning just as much as they are. I think when they only see perfect performances, or they only see the end result, they sort of think it's this magic process. So I will let my students see me practice. When they come in, sometimes I'm practicing my music. I'll talk about my teachers, so they can understand that it is a process. I also make them improvise before they ever can read music. We sit down at the piano and I just make them play with me so that they can see that the music is an organic thing that we can create with each other. And when they see that and they believe it, that they are musical, then that empowers them to go forward and do the harder work.
When you started back at the Armstrong campus of Georgia Southern, you decided to major in music because you felt that music could change lives.
When my professors encouraged me, I felt I could go into this, and I had the opportunity to teach and in the community, and I could just really see that there was a potential to reach people maybe who were not already expert musicians. I think a lot of times at the university we're teaching people who already have skills. But so many people would come up to me and say, oh, if only I kept playing piano, or I really want my kid to have that creative expression, or I want them to have that outlet, that emotional outlet, or I'm in my church choir, but I want to do better. I want to be a better member of the worship team. And I kept having people come to me and say those things. And I thought there's really a way to be useful to people at the entry level of music in the ways that makes our community more vibrant, that we all can participate in. And that's really what I'm interested in. I always want to do high-level music, of course, but I never want to be elitist with my music. I never want to only speak to a certain group of people. I think the great thing of music is it's accessible to everyone. We all have ears, or we all can feel rhythm. Whether we can hear or not, we have that sense of rhythm in our bodies. It's a great way to participate with a community and strengthen our community ties to each other. That's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in using music to aid learning across the board. So in my lessons, I teach math, I teach history, I teach languages, I teach public speaking, how to present yourself, confidence, and that's great for kids. And that just strengthens the community.
And it's really amazing how involvement in music at the basic level can really improve performance across the board.
Oh, absolutely. Because when you feel good about yourself, or when you have a chance to express your emotions, you can then approach everything else with more confidence. And cognitively, especially piano, but voice too, music actuates so many different parts of the brain, and different parts of the body are being controlled in independent ways, that it's truly global learning. And it is so good for personal therapy, for memory, for stimulating yourself to work in ways that maybe you don't in the normal course of the day. And this is not even the field of music therapy, which is a recognized field and a clinical specialty, and is not what I do. But there are people who study that very seriously as a complementary medicine for all sorts of people in all walks of life. All I can tell you is my experience. I see people come in and they're tired, and they walk out standing up straight and smiling. And I've had my students say, this is the cheapest therapy that I could have. This is not a medical statement, but just, anecdotal report. I see the effect on people. That makes me happy. I have a student who came in to see me who's very shy, but she's been working on Italian arias. She's in her middle school years. We were saying, in the future, if you have to give a speech in class, you've already sung in another language in front of other people. How could this be hard? She feels like she can do anything. I think too many people in our society forget how these skills apply to the rest of our endeavors. We do them in a fun way. We apply skills like emotional regulation and confidence, and how to handle stress and fear, and how to use our memory. And then most of us will not be musicians, but we will take that into our high school, into our college, into our workplaces. And we have to give presentations, and we have to deal with difficult situations, keep our cool, think quickly. All those skills are useful. It's a great, safe way to learn those skills.
Tonight we have Abbey Terry, local classical singer and voice, piano, and drama teacher in the studio. Now, earlier on, you said that you really focus on those students who are developing their basic skills.
Yep.
But you have at least one student that you just mentioned who is studying Italian arias,
Ah,
which strikes me as being a little bit more advanced skill.
well, you might think that, but it just depends on this person's interest. I try not to put any limits on what is hard. It's actually not that hard to learn the rules of another language. We all learned English. A lot of these kids are studying Spanish in school. To hear and learn the basic pronunciation rules, it's a learning challenge. So I would set her, go and look this up. Look what the translation is. What does a noun look like in this language? What does a verb look like? And we would practice it, and then she really rose to the challenge. These are simple arias that we use for teaching. They're the sort of introductory Italian stuff. A lot of times we teach Italian when we're starting to learn with young singers because we are trying to teach them things about awareness of the mouth, and Italian has very open vowels and very frontal consonants. And so it helps them learn to shape their mouth in ways that they maybe might not use with English. Whenever you're trying to learn something new, you want to do something new. If we only sang in English, it would be very easy to default to our natural habits of speech. And American English is quite lazy in its consonants and in the placement of the sound in the mouth. And I want them to learn new muscle habits, so I want them to do something unfamiliar that's difficult, so they have to concentrate. I want them to feel like they're doing something special that's unusual. And it works for that. I remember my teacher gave me a set of exercises that they're called vocab when I was 11. And I thought I was on top of the moon. I felt like the queen of the world. Maybe it's not for everyone, but for some students that's really a good thing.
I'll describe these Vakai exercises.
Niccolo Vakai, he was a guy who was working in the 1800s. And at the time, opera singers were bigger than rock stars. They call the divas, divi, gods for a reason. They were just the ultra big name celebrities. And really they made a lot of money also. So everybody wanted to be like them. But not everybody, at the time, operatic training, that was a 6 to 8 hour job every day. I mean, that was a full-time job just to train yourself to be an opera singer. Their training was just tremendous. They could do things. They just improvised music on the stage regularly, like the greatest jazz stars now. Everybody wanted to be like them. Niccolo Vakai was a voice teacher to the aristocrats. And they wanted to study music and be like that. They wanted to sing in the drawing rooms, sing for their friends. But they didn't have time for all that training. So he came up with a set of short 32 exercises that would teach you these techniques in short little songs, teach you the ear training that you needed. And they're very cleverly designed with contemporary poetry. They are very charming and they're great for kids because they're very short. But each one of them teaches a little important concept. And he was very successful in that regard. And so I like to use his work. A lot of times when I'm teaching the parents also. And I try to always bring the parents into my lesson, especially in the beginning, so that they can learn along with the child, and then they can really be the help in the home during the week, to sort of at least to understand the concepts that we're working on, especially for piano. And often I find that the parents will say, oh, I wanted to play piano as a kid, right? I never got to, or I quit. And it's bringing something back for them too. And then I encourage them to play together.
Now talk about the progression of a student. How does a beginning student start with voice?
I can't speak for other teachers. I can only speak for myself. And I'm a little bit of an outsider because I came by such an indirect route. Mm-hmm. My teaching really focuses on grounding us in how the body works, first and foremost. People often come in with a lot of misconceptions. They've heard different things, like sing from the diaphragm, or sing big, or they have to stand in a certain way. The first thing I have to do is establish a sense of trust. Like, they have to feel safe with me. I could really hurt their feelings if I do the wrong thing. The first thing we usually talk about is breathing, because breathing is the source of almost every problem, really, in singing. Famous singer Joan Sutherland and Marilyn Horne gave a master class. And these two, the greatest singers of their generation, they said, oh, singing is just breathing. It's not that hard. But they were right. So we'll break down like how the anatomy works, and we'll relate to basic processes like the breath that we have when we're scared. Everyone does. That feeling, that is the lowest, most activated breath that we have. So I'm trying to help them move past the state that we all sort of live in, which is sort of disconnected from our neck up, our brain. Most of us Americans live disconnected from our bodies, right? We're taught to sort of suppress our emotions to get by in daily life, right? We have to. We can't be reacting to every little thing that we see. And we're taught to sort of disconnect from our bodies, whether because of our cell phones or because of we're rational beings or whatever. I'm trying to reconnect them to the body. So I make them stretch and I make them breathe. We feel that what that feeling is of that sort of emergency breath, or what it feels like to laugh. Like if I make them laugh spontaneously, then I'm always cueing them back in to what that laugh felt like. Where did you feel it? A lot of it is me asking the question, where did you feel that? What did you feel? What was that like? They may not have the answers yet. But to ask the question means they have to become aware. They have to start paying attention to things in ways that they had never paid attention to. And the first few lessons for me teaching voice is really a process of building their awareness of their body and redefining what they think of as singing. Because usually they think of it as a sound. They think of it as, I want to sound better. Or they're listening to themselves, which I have to tell you is the biggest dilemma, the biggest problem for singers, is that we never can hear our own voice. We'll never hear our own voice accurately because it's coming from inside our body and our ear is distorting the sound. If we believe what our own sound inside our mind tells us, we may do very weird things to the sound. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, oh, my voice is nasal, when it's nothing of the sort, because they hear it that way. And that will hold them back. When you have your voice teacher say, I want you to just sing from your feeling and not from the sound, because you can trust your body. If it feels good and lined up, you can trust it. And I'm going to tell you whether that sound was good or not. That's how we begin to work. And once we have set up those sort of good reflexes, then the sound just starts coming naturally. Then we start working on just using that as we start to sing up and down our range of our voice and finding what our natural range is. Usually people have a belief that they can't sing high notes, or they're a soprano, or they're an alto. And usually our actual range is much wider than we believe for everyone. And for most regular people who are not highly trained, it's about the same. But because we don't exercise our voices, it's not easy, and we can't use it easily. So people are often really surprised when they find just what they can do with just a little bit of relaxation and technique. And I find that people are often surprised. I ask people, was this what you expected? After the first lesson or two lessons, they're like, no, but it was good. They think we're going to stand and sing scales, or we're going to sing a song that they know. And we will do that. I want people to sing and to enjoy singing and to just love what they're doing and be happy. And if they want to come to me and sing karaoke, we'll work on that. If they want to do arias, we'll work on that. But we begin with the grounding in how the body works and how we can use what we know of being the mind-body connection to sort of reduce our stress so that we can get out of our own way. Just enjoy it.
So starting fundamentally with understanding the body and the mechanics of breathing particularly, because, yes, singing and talking
right.
is simply controlled breathing.
Yes.
Then you start with using that understanding to better control their voice.
Better coordinate their voice. I don't like to use the word control because people think of that as something they have to sort of tamp down or really dictate with their mind, or something they have to measure out. And what we are doing is we're practicing in a relaxed way over and over to coordinate maybe the muscles that control our vocal cords with the muscles that control our breathing, with our brain that understands pitch and time And we're learning to have all that work together smoothly. I mean, I guess it is control, but I don't like that word.
Well, coordinate, yes.
Coordinate.
So coordinate the breathing, coordinating the posture, to then start the singing process. And it's that point they start singing the scales that they
Or singing anything they like, really.
that they thought they were going to do the first time.
Right. Or singing a song, a hymn they know, or just making sounds. Because once they have that, they can take that and apply that. And then, depending on what they have come for and what they want to learn, I also will always teach music theory, piano, how to read music, how to understand chords, how to understand harmony. Those things come depending on their interests. But as a basic thing, unless someone actively tells me they do not want to learn that, I assume that I will teach all my voice students basic piano and to read music, especially children. I don't think it's responsible not to do that, because it's just a necessary tool to help us grow. And it's a cognitive challenge.
And as we said, the cognitive challenges are some of the most valuable because they can be used then in other skills.
Exactly. People will say, oh, I didn't think I could do this, but I see I can.
And just that confidence will help in other areas.
Exactly.
Because you said the next step, doing scales or maybe singing something that they want to sing, or maybe singing a hymn that they want to sing. What's the range of the type of student who comes to you, and what's that step with each of them?
You mean the next step after that?
The next step after that.
I'm actually very proud to say that I have had students come to me who could not match pitch. When you say something, I can't carry a tune, or like I'm tone deaf, actual tone deafness is very, very rare. But I have had some students come to me who truly could not tell the highest note from they couldn't tell the difference between those. Students who really could not copy a tune because they believed that they could learn it. They did their work, and we were able to get them over the course of perhaps a year and a half to being able to independently sing in tune. And when I tell people that, they are skeptical. But I have seen it happen so many times now that I'm no longer skeptical. And I worked with singers who are fairly advanced. A lot of times I'm working with children who want to try this out. Maybe they've been in choir, or somebody said, hey, you have a good voice. Sometimes people want to study singing because mistakenly they think it's easier than piano. Or they think it's easier or cheaper somehow, and actually usually is cheaper. I mean, in the sense of you don't have to buy an instrument. But it's a low-cost investment. It's not easier, though, and the things we have to learn are just as complex, sometimes more complex. But you asked about the next step. I don't want to say just scales and exercises. We use these scales and exercises in order to teach them how to warm up their voice, so that they can then warm themselves up and exercise their voice every day. Those things are a means to an end. They're not an end in themselves. That's the way we practice those muscle skills, those reflexes. The same way you would take batting practice or pitching practice. From there, then they can bring me songs they're working on, and then I will assign them songs that I think are going to be good for some particular thing they need to learn. Like if they're having trouble believing they can sing high notes, I might assign them something that has high notes in it so that we can exercise that. Or if they're having trouble sustaining their breath through long phrases, I might bring them something with that. Each thing that we do is just a vehicle to gain confidence and gain ability in that skill. And we start putting those things together. Performance is a skill in itself. So actually having to get up and do it, manage your nerves, be in front of people. So we have recitals twice a year where we just have to practice that. What do we do to prepare? How do we memorize something? And so I have to teach them memory skills. As people start developing that ability, I'm there to watch them and sort of keep them from falling back. So if you don't practice something fairly regularly, you're going to slide back into your old habits. And so someone has to stay on top of you to watch as you're developing, to make sure you're not developing bad habits, or you're not sliding backwards, or you don't develop the wrong concept. Maybe you think you have to have a narrow mouth, and I have to watch you for that. It's just a process of continually working and retooling so that you feel comfortable and you build your skills.
You're listening to WRUU-LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul.
WRUU brings you the most diverse and passionate local radio programming on the air in Savannah. This all-volunteer and nonprofit community radio station accepts no money from any form of government. Our diversity and independence is made possible only through the generous financial support of listeners like you. We rely on your annual and ongoing monthly contributions to cover the many costs associated with bringing you our broadcast and web programming. If you are a contributor, thank you. If you're not yet a contributor, please show your appreciation of the role WRUU plays in your life by becoming a contributor in any amount. You can donate quickly and easily by credit card or check. Just find the donate and subscribe links at WRUU.org. Thanks for listening to and supporting WRUU.
This portion of WRUU-LP Savannah Soundings programming is made possible by support from the 2018 Savannah Music Festival, which runs from March 29 through April 14, 2018, presenting classical artist Murray Pariah, the Zuckerman Trio, Atlanta Symphony Orchestra with Robert McDuffie, Stili Antico, Daniel Hope and Friends Chamber Music Series, and more. Information at savannahmusicfestival.org.
You're listening to Music Local and Sustainable, and I'm your host, Dave Lake. Tonight we have Abbey Terry, local classical singer and voice, piano, and drama teacher in the studio. The type of student who comes in and really has a problem matching pitch, how do you go about working through that?
First thing is you have to make them believe it's possible. Well, most people already know that they can't. Interestingly, those people often can sing quite nicely with the radio. But if you take the radio away, they can't sing at all. So the first thing that we have to do is kind of wean them off their dependence on the radio. The part of the brain that coordinates singing along with something is not the same as the part that imagines music inside your mind and will let you sort of hear it in your mind and then replicate it. Those are two different functions. If we're too dependent on the one, we may not develop the skill for the other. That skill is something we call audiation, that ability to hear music. Incidentally, that's what allowed Beethoven to compose even though he went deaf, because he had developed that skill to the ability that he could just hear it in his mind. But that's what allows us to just start singing a song and be correct. What builds that often in children is singing nursery rhymes and singing children's songs. And very interestingly, the people I find who can't match pitch, I ask, let's sing Mary Had a Little Lamb. And they don't know that song. They never sang that as children. They never sang anything as kids. And then I'm like, this is it. So we go back and we sing those fundamental kids songs because they teach the fundamental intervals and the fundamental patterns of Western music. Once you have that as a foundation sort of in your memory, you can imagine what Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star sounds like. You know what the first notes, twinkle, twinkle, right, sound like. Your brain has started to build that ability of spatial measurement in sound. So we work those kind of very basic songs. And I make them do it without the reference point, without singing along. And we have to believe that it's going to get better. Good is the enemy of better. You have to be willing to be bad for a while. You have to be willing to not be perfect to get through it. And so many people will not be willing to be bad. The ones that have succeeded at this have been able to tolerate that journey of working through it, which is so courageous, and I'm so proud of them to do that. We start by singing those kinds of songs, and just it has to be daily practice. And I really impress upon them that actually your brain is very efficient. This is the way we work for survival. Your brain will not retain anything that you don't use daily, that you don't need. It's very efficient. So if you want to tell yourself that this is something you have to learn, you have to make it something that's everyday use, or it won't start building those neurological connections. And when they believe that, then they do it. And then they see. And so we take a baseline. This was last week, this was 6 weeks ago. And then we would play back those recordings, and they can hear. And that spurs them forward.
So you record
We
as
do.
part of the training?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, I will, because I want them to be able to hear what's happening. Because I want them to believe that there is a disconnect between what they hear in their mind and what they hear with their own ear and what's actually happening. And also I encourage all my students to record their lessons so they can remember what we're talked about, so they can review it. But I would never record anybody without their permission. It's a tool that you would be silly not to use. They can have accurate feedback.
It's a way to see progress.
It's a way to see progress.
I had the pleasure of hearing you in performance just a little while ago when you did some Baroque songs, and that was over, is it St. John's Episcopal?
It was at the Green Meldrum House,
Green
which is
Meldrum House, yeah.
attached to the St. John's Episcopal. And I was really fortunate to work with Sarah Stender, who's in Beaufort. She's an organist and church musician up there. But she is also a harpsichordist. That was her major area of study at the IU School of Music. And we're really lucky to have in our area two fine harpsichordists. We have Ann Acker, who's a world-known builder of instruments and performer. Sarah, it's just a joy to work with. We have this chalice harpsichord at St. John's. It has just been restored. It was a gift in Father Ralston's bequest, and he included in his bequest the money to restore it. It's a little bit different. It's a modern American harpsichord. Chalice was making harpsichords that would hopefully be as stable as the piano. He wanted them to be useful in contemporary music and have a sound that would carry. And so he did some interesting and innovative things to the technology of the instrument. And so we have one, and it has the sweetest sound. I have to admit that I was not a fan of the harpsichord. I mean, I didn't know much about it, obviously, but what I had heard just sounded like this sort of jangly little tinkly instrument that didn't have a lot of range or color or capability. Just a second best piano. And hearing a master play it is very different, obviously. But this instrument has beautiful lute-like qualities. It has a stop that makes it sound like a lute and a guitar. It has beautiful tone, and it was such a joy. And so I hope that we can do more, and that more people will want to work with it and work with her, because we just want to see it played. It's just too good to let it go by. This was the first time I had ever sung with a harpsichord, and it was very sonically different. It's a little more delicate. Sound is not as robust. But in terms of me adjusting my sound or the way that I sing, I didn't change so much. I did change my sound because the music we were doing was Baroque and was house music. It was Dowland and Purcell, and it was written to be sung. Those songs were to be sung in a sort of intimate setting, right? Not necessarily on a stage. They were written to be sung by people just sitting around with their lute, entertaining themselves and each other. The sound that I aimed for with that was a little bit smaller and a little bit cleaner, without the big wah sound. I didn't change it for the instrument.
Now, did she or you or together select the particular songs that would be sung?
I picked those. I thought they were interesting because they have this sort of theme of time running through them. And I just thought they were a little different than your typical love song. A lot of the songs of the period, they are love poetry. One had some political statements that were being made. One was on the theme of time, but it gave us a sense of reflection. And I think that was one of the characteristics of late Elizabethan poetry, that it was not simple. It was made to sort of give you things to ponder in it, to think what is really being said, what double and triple meanings. That was part of the enjoyment of it. You could sit and reflect on it. And the songs, you can sing them over and over again. And then the last song that I sang, The Evening Hymn by Purcell, really has a profound message about spirit and body, and as we approach end of life or end of things, how do we have assurance in the afterlife or in security through the night? I just love that message. I thought it's always great when you can sing something that's both beautiful and meaningful at the same time.
Let's talk a little bit about the Purcell.
Okay.
Why did you select this one?
I selected it because it's a beautiful song, but because the text was written by an Irish bishop at the time, and it's drawing a comparison between coming to the end of the day, seeing the sun set, and that we know that our body is going down to rest, but where is our soul going to rest? And maybe we're facing a sleepless night. And I think that's a situation that we can all find ourselves in nowadays, the anxiety of what's going to happen, how are we going to handle things. A lot of us have a lot of worries on our mind. At some point, I think in every great story or every great song, there's a decision point, like a moment of change, right? A moment when you come to a realization or something is altered, right? That's what makes a great story interesting. So in the course of the song, the narrator asks that question and then comes to his own answer, that he's going to find his rest in God. His security is in God, whether through the night, that he's going to be safe, or as he enters into death, he's secure in the mercy and providence of God. And it would have been very easy. That's where the text ends. The text ends with just one word, Alleluia. It would have been very easy for Purcell to just end it. But he goes on for 16 more Alleluias. That sense of rejoicing, as I worked on the song, I realized each Alleluia is a little bit different. The first one is kind of like quiet. It's a statement. I'm accepting the positive nature of God. My natural state should be rejoicing. And as you go through them, it's almost like you're moving upwards, or the soul is moving upwards, or they're intensifying. They become more elaborate. There's a moment when one seems like the heavenly gates are opening. And I just love that kind of musical description of these emotional states or this journey. And so I just thought it was a very profound song. I just thought of this is interesting. But talking about security and confidence, as I worked on this song with my teacher, I did not think I could actually make it through my breath through these long lines, these long, complicated lines of music, and I would break them up and stop in the middle of them. And I had to come to believe that I actually could do it. And I was able to do it.
So let's listen to the Henry Purcell song, Now That the Sun Hath Veiled His Light.
Mm-hmm.
Give the world good night.
Tonight we have Abbey Terry, local classical singer and voice, piano, and drama teacher in the studio. When you went through the hallelujahs at the end, they became a little bit more complicated, a little bit more ornamentation. Now, is that written in the score?
It is. It's written in.
Okay.
It's written in. However, there is license in this style of music to ornament, and it's expected that if a phrase sort of repeats, or once you've made the initial statement of a phrase, and then usually the composer will then sort of restate the theme at some point, it's expected that the performers at that time would have ornamented the heck out of it. You know, have changed it, and they called this divisions. If you ever read anything in this time period, she's good at divisions. That's what they mean. She's really good at ornamenting a line. And they would have expected you to do that. People have different tastes with choosing to make those choices. Some people like to do more, some people like to do less. It depends on the song and what the text calls for. It's always a fun challenge to see how you can fit your text painting and the musical elaboration in a graceful way. In one of the other songs that I did on this set was about bees. I did a lot of voice painting with like buzzy sounds and trills and flutters to sort of evoke the ideas of the insects that they were talking about in the poetry.
It was about bees, but it probably wasn't.
Well, it was not quite about bees. However, when the poet starts talking about all the wasps and the gnats and the butterflies, it was fun to sort of add those things in, those effects.
And what song was this?
It was A Time When Silly Bees. That was the second Dowling song.
Dowling is early Baroque. Henry Purcell, of course, is full Baroque.
Yes.
How do these differ in the way that a singer would approach the songs?
I think Dowland has even more of a sense of sort of non-professional music. He really is writing at a time when the merchant class is rising, there's a sense of prosperity, and people have some surplus money, and they're starting to play music for fun in their houses. Music was seen as a normal part of education. It was one of the 7 main subjects of the trivium. And it was seen as essential for developing the character of a person. It was not a side subject in the way we think of it now. It was to train the mind for all the mathematics and rhetoric and and memory and all those things. Most people who wanted to have some sense of learning were studying music. Dowland is really printing music for people to use in their homes and to play on the lute. Maybe they have a virginal, maybe they don't. They're playing around the table at home after dinner. And when they're sad in their home and they want to get their emotions out, right? Purcell is writing more for performance at the court, for church music, for more technically skilled singers.
So he's writing for the profession.
He's writing more for the professional. Not that these things were not sung by other people or taken home, but his music would have been more likely to be performed with an audience of some kind or with a larger group in a larger room. I don't particularly approach them in a sense of like the ornamentation or the technical stuff. Very much differently. Maybe in attitude. But the Dowland, when I performed it, I have more of a sense of sort of personal communication, I guess. just fun between ourselves. And maybe with the parcel has a slightly more elevated statement I'm trying to make. But technically, the vocal demands are not very much different. The two themselves, though, are very much different than, say, romantic music would be or opera would be. They are very different.
So let's talk a little bit about It Was a Time When Silly Bees.
Mm-hmm. That was a fun song. The poet on that was Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, who was very famously the favorite of Queen Elizabeth and very famously executed for treason. This was a poem composed in maybe 1598, I think right before he was sent to Ireland, which was a disastrous expedition. But the poem is using the metaphor of bees and time, the herb, the time, and the chronological sense, is a homophone play on words. Bee is complaining that even though he's done all this work in the hive, that he's not a lazy drone. He does all this work, brings all the honey back to the hive. He's not really getting the recognition he deserves from the king. And at the time, in Elizabethan England, there was debate over whether the leader of a hive was actually male or female. And it was used commonly at the time as a metaphor for the state. That there was a queen, all the workers worked, and then there were these sort of lazy drones who just kind of sat around, right, just taking up the fat of the land, eating up the honey. And there was this idea that from time to time, especially in winter, the hive would expel the drones because they were just lazy and did nothing. So people would use this in politics. When you couldn't say something directly, they would say it in poetry. So Essex is making some sort of complaint to the Queen that he's done all this work, but he hasn't gotten recognition. Maybe it's time to drain the swamp.
Get all those drones out.
Get rid of, kick them out. Of course, that could be used by the working class to also say, the aristocracy is not really doing much either. It's a metaphor that goes both ways. Dowland has taken this song, and it's in 1603, which is the year of Elizabeth's death and the year of the accession of James. And the song is very funny. It's very sprightly, and it has lots of potential for that kind of vocal color, as I mentioned, ornamentation. But Dowland might have been using it to make a play for his own attention at court, because he also had been working very hard, and he was not getting recognition. There's some indication that he might have been involved in intelligence work in Europe for the court of England. There's letters that go back and forth between him and Robert Cecil. He had access to so many places because he was a world-famous lutenist. So it's a very interesting thing to ponder, but it's a fun song to sing.
It was the time when silly bees could speak, and in that time I was a silly bee, of that long time until my heart could break, yet never found the time would favor me. Oh, the swan I wanted did not fly, yet brought my wax and honey to the hive. Oh, the swan I only did not fly, yet brought my wax and honey to the hive. Then thus I passed, when Cyprus I could give. Why should these
Now let's compare this John Dowling, which you do in a more lighthearted.
More lighthearted, relaxed. I'm trying to sing it in a way that's very accessible, that doesn't have the sense of sort of formal concert perfection, but just something that would be fun to sort of sing and laugh about. It didn't keep the audience at a distance. And that's something I'm always looking for in my performance. I'm always looking for connection.
It's really interesting, too, because the stereotype of the classical singer
Oh, yes.
is standing there up straight, hands folded across their chest.
Oh, my goodness, yes.
And sort of unemotionally bringing
Yes.
forward this sound.
Absolutely. And yeah.
But when you really look at a classical singer, they immediately connect with the audience. They emote physically to reflect what they're singing about.
Yes.
And it is a marvelous, dramatic presentation.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's what we strive for, at least in theory. That's the goal. But that would have been consistent with the Baroque, too. They really saw the music as sort of an expression of the different passions. They had these things really kind of mapped out. They were really trying to express specific emotional states and maybe move between them in music. There's also this sense of sort of courtly grace that, I don't know if you've ever heard the term sprezzatura. It's the idea that we should do something in a way that looks effortless, but that we can't look like we're trying to look effortless. We should look completely natural at it, even though if we're working very hard. We want to give that impression, that feeling of just natural artlessness, so that you can attend more to what's being said, more to the music and to the words, than to me as a performer. If you're thinking, oh, what a great singer she is, then I haven't done my job. You should only be thinking about what I'm saying in the music. I should disappear, except as the vehicle. That is very kind. I'm so glad to have you say that, because yes, I get that a lot. There is a place to try to aim for excellence. And there is a place for formality in classical music. Sometimes we lose sight of the fact we have the audience there, and it's for a reason. We have to connect with them. We have something to express.
With Dowling's song, It Was Time When Silly Bees, you were sort of bringing the people into this, oh, these silly bees, wink, wink.
Right.
You got this
Yes.
really good impression of, I'm singing about these bees, not really.
Right, really. Well, and the other thing in that song is that it's really a dialogue. So I have to be both the bee who's complaining and also the king who's scolding the bee. And so I have to show both characters in one person. Yeah, I had to move a little bit, and also to sort of give you different body postures to sort of indicate that shift.
Other Dowling song, When Time Stands Still, was approached very differently. So talk a little bit about that.
In that one, I tried to give us a sense of sort of reverie and reflection. I envisioned it more as a person who was contemplating a portrait. The text is, time stands still with gazing on her face. Stand still and gaze, for minutes turn to hours and years. So I wanted to have an attitude in which maybe time felt suspended, and we just sort of heard this beautiful music and could just contemplate the sense of faith and devotion that the person was speaking about. I think through that song, the decision point and that moment of transition that we're looking for, the decision point in that song is probably when the person contemplates the beauty and the faith and the constancy of their beloved, and makes the statement that they are going to decide to offer them their faith and their commitment back. Their faith will be as changeless as the other person's constancy. And it has a very serene line. The musical line is very slow, and I didn't ornament nearly as much in that one. The only ornamentation that I did in that one was to imitate the hovering of Cupid. So there's a line, Cupid hovers up and down, and so I tried to give the impression of a fluttering little baby angel in one line, but I wanted to keep a serene line.
Let's listen to John Dowling's Time Stands Still.
Time stands still, gazing on her face.
And so you're going to be performing at the Lutheran Church of the Ascension.
That's my next big performance,
And
yes.
when is that?
It's going to be 2 Bach cantatas in one night. I'm so excited about it. And really, we haven't had a Bach cantata done in this town in a long time. April 22nd at 5 p.m., Lutheran Church of the Ascension. And we will have orchestra for both.
Tonight we have had Abbey Terry, local classical singer, vocal, piano, and drama teacher, here in the studio. And I want to thank you so much for coming in.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. This has been a really delight. I love to be here.
This has been another edition of Music Local and Sustainable, and I've been your host, Dave Lake. Save this time for another show next week.
Well, I know we ain't headed for the Hall of Fame. Gonna give it what we got, man, that ain't no shame. Let me know if you can hear me. Check, check, 1, 2. Let me know if you can